This story is unfortunately true. I've changed names and ages slightly for privacy. I grew up in the Sierra Nevadas, a really beautiful part of the world with sprawling pines, rugged mountains, and crystalline lakes. I wasn't big on camping, but I spent a good chunk of my childhood weekends hiking with family and friends, and many summer days tubing on the lake. The summer I was 16, about 10 years ago now, my cousin Celia had come home from her first year of college, and her boyfriend Jay was visiting to meet her family and friends. Jay, like many tourists, wanted to go on a hike with lake views. Celia and I decided to take him on one of our favorites, a moderate hike through the woods on a gentle incline that peaks at a hollow in the trees overlooking Lake Tahoe below. Jay had some hiking experience, albeit in less rugged terrain, and we thought this hike would be a fun challenge with the spectacular views he wanted. It is an in and out trail that takes about 2 to 3 hours to the top and 2 to 3 hours back down. There are some smaller trails that branch off and offer steep inclines or windy paths down towards the lake. The three of us set off on the hike on the first Saturday of his visit. The trail isn't the easiest to find, but it's really popular with locals because of the view and general lack of tourists. It was mislabeled on the most popular trails website at that time, so it was hard to find if you didn't know where to look. We passed only a couple of other hikers, mostly granola-type couples with camelback water backpacks, hiking with their dogs. We made it to the top in good time and enjoyed our lunches overlooking the lake. Jay was appropriately impressed by the views and spent a lot of time taking pictures in between selfies and bites of sandwiches. We mostly just relaxed and got to know each other. After about an hour of relaxing, we heard a scream in the distance, specifically a mountain lion scream. If you've never heard a mountain lion scream, it's really unnerving. It sounds a bit like a very loud, terrified woman letting out a blood-curdling shriek of terror. YouTube it. It's truly a horrible sound. This was not good because when a mountain lion screams, it's either part of a mating ritual or two male lions are fighting. Either way, hearing one scream meant there were multiple mountain lions close by. The bears in the Sierras are softies, but the mountain lions will attack you, your pets, and they've even been known to attack bikers. There's safety in numbers, but even 3 is risky if you're talking about a hungry lion. Jay was really freaked out. There weren't big predators roaming around where he's from, and the thought of an animal large enough and willing enough to eat him was off-putting. Celia and I were wary but not alarmed. Between the natural disasters that frequently occurred in the region, such as earthquakes, wildfires, mega blizzards, and the sometimes deadly wild animals that got close to town, we were fairly unshakable. We had seen plenty of bears and snakes on hikes, and sometimes encountering critters is the price you pay to enjoy the natural beauty. It also wasn't the first time we had heard mountain lions, and we had both seen them before, albeit mostly from the safety of a cabin or a house. There was also an incident where, as kids, we laid out some expensive steak in my backyard in the hopes of luring a mountain lion to take pictures of it. It did not work, and my mother was unhappy about the steaks. Anyway, Celia and I told Jay that it was fine, but that we needed to pack it up and get back down the mountain. We packed up the leftovers of our lunches and took off at a brisk pace back down the mountain. About 40 minutes into the hike back, Jay realized that he had forgotten his phone at the lookout in his rush to leave. Of course, after a brief back and forth between Jay and Celia, "I don't need it back that badly, Jay. It has all of your pictures from the spring break trip. Not to mention you're a broke college student. Yes, you need to go back." We decided to go back and get it. Well, we decided that Celia and Jay would hike back up to retrieve his phone, and I would stay there on the trail alone to warn any other potential hikers that there were lions in the area. I was mostly worried about those hikers with their off-leash dogs and wanted to prevent a wandering lab from getting mauled. This was obviously not ideal for any of us, but it seemed like the best choice at the time. I found a nice rock to sit on in the shade just off the trail and was going through the pictures we took on my phone and playing Temple Run. There was no cell service or internet, but I knew they'd be back soon. Celia and Jay had been gone for around 50 minutes when I heard the scream again, and it was hard to tell, but I thought it was closer than before. I started to get pretty nervous. Being in groups is far preferable when dealing with mountain lions, and I felt like perfect bait sitting there alone in the woods. About 20 minutes after that, I heard the scream again, and there was now zero doubt that it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from up the trail, towards where Celia and Jay would be coming down very soon. I sincerely hoped. Logically, I knew that lions don't scream when hunting. They are quiet. If a lion was hunting me, I wouldn't know it. The screaming meant it was doing something else, something not feeding related. That knowledge did not make me less nervous. I became hyper-alert, whipping my head around every time I heard a noise or thought I saw a flash of movement. I turned my flashlight on, even though it was the middle of the day. I got off my rock to stand in the middle of the trail to have visibility up, down, and in the trees on each side of the trail. A couple of minutes after that, I heard it again, extremely close by. By this point, I had full goosebumps and a pit in my stomach, a complete sense of dread. I looked around and tried to find the best place for me to stand back covered, in case of the worst. I decided to wedge myself up against a tree next to the rock I had been sitting on. I had good visibility up and down the trail still, and into the trees across the trail. I continued scanning around, focusing on the trail where I thought the screams were coming from. Suddenly, I saw something. Standing still, 20 feet up the trail, a couple of feet off of it, was a man. He was completely naked, filthy, skinny, and just standing there looking at me. I didn't even hear him come up. It sounds cliché, but it really was like he appeared out of nowhere, especially since I'd been focusing on looking for the lion in that direction. If you don't know where you're going, it's easy to get lost in the woods around here. The weather can change quickly, and people panic and get more lost in their attempts to find their cars, and it doesn't take long being alone, lacking food and water in the wilderness, to make people a little disoriented, a little crazy. The infamous Donner Party incident happened maybe an hour away from where I was standing. My first thought was that the man was probably a lost hiker, and judging by how dirty he was, he'd been lost a long time. He needed help. I had heard about people with hypothermia stripping off all of their clothes and thought maybe that was what happened. Now, this took place during the summer, and there's no way that someone would get hypothermia in July, but that didn't occur to me until later. I started walking towards him, asking if he's okay. I suddenly got this feeling of wrongness. I don't know how else to describe it, but my feeling of dread tripled. The hair stood up on my neck. I stopped in my tracks, maybe 15 feet away now, and had the overwhelming urge to run away. It seemed wrong. It felt wrong. He looked wrong in a way I can't quite articulate. Instead of wanting to help him, I was absolutely terrified of him. I asked again if he's okay. He looked at me, then opened his mouth wide and screamed. Not a normal scream. He screamed just like a mountain lion, a high-pitched keening shriek that made my blood run cold. It occurred to me that we were probably hearing him the whole time. It was the single most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. I started screaming too. I was preparing to run away down the trail, I suppose, but also really did not want to turn my back on him. Suddenly, he closed his mouth, turned around, and ran into the woods very quickly. He just disappeared into the trees, but the feeling of wrongness was still with me. I felt like I was going to throw up. I considered bolting down the trail to get away, but decided to wait for Celia and Jay, who luckily arrived within 10 or 15 minutes. I told them what happened, and we decided to call it into the Rangers when we got service. Celia and I had seen some odd things in our lives, her more than me, but she turned white as a sheet when I told them what happened. I guess they didn't hear anything at all on the way down. I've always been deeply unsettled since the incident. Did I see a mentally ill, lost hiker who really needed my help, or did I see something else? Celia insists it was a skinwalker or something similar, something malevolent and inhuman, mimicking the call of a mountain lion and stalking us down the trail. I can't help but think she might be right. I've been hiking since then, but never the same trail, and never by myself. I still think about that man sometimes. If he was just some guy, I sincerely hope he found his way back home. I can't help but think that he didn't.